You walk into the grocery store. Last month, eggs were $3. Today, they're $6. The gas station sign on the corner seems to change every week, and it's never going down. Rent notices arrive with higher numbers each year, and salaries never seem to catch up. We call this inflation. But here's the truth. Inflation isn't just about higher prices. It's about power. It's about who gains and who loses when money itself loses value. Because for every family struggling to pay for dinner, there's someone somewhere quietly getting richer from the exact same rise in prices. Welcome to another episode of Nexus-Feed Deep Dive. Today we're going to break down what inflation really is, why it happens, and, most importantly, who it helps and who it hurts. By the end, you'll see inflation not just as an economic concept, but as a political weapon. Let's start at the beginning. Inflation is the decline in the purchasing power of money. In plain language, it means that over time, your dollar, your pound, or your peso buys you less. A little bit of inflation isn't just normal. It's considered healthy. Most central banks around the world actually want about 2% inflation each year. Why? Because it signals a growing economy. Businesses can raise prices a little, workers can demand slightly higher wages, and debts become easier to pay back. It's like oil in the engine, it keeps things running smoothly. But too much inflation, 10, 20, or 50% a year, is a disaster. It breaks trust in money itself. History gives us extreme examples. In Weimar Germany in the 1920s, inflation became so insane that workers carried their wages home in wheelbarrows. A single loaf of bread could cost billions of marks. Families burned currency for heat because money was worth less than firewood. That collapse didn't just destroy savings, it destroyed faith in democracy, opening the door to extremism and the rise of Adolf Hitler. A more recent example is Zimbabwe in the 2000s, where inflation got so bad that the government printed a $100 trillion bill. People needed stacks of cash just to buy groceries. But inflation doesn't have to be that extreme to be destructive. The United States in the 1970s suffered stagflation. Rising prices combined with stagnant growth. Oil shocks sent gasoline prices soaring, wages couldn't keep up, and the public lost faith in the government's ability to manage the economy. And then there's the post-COVID years, from 2021 to 2023, when global supply chains snapped, governments had pumped trillions into stimulus spending, and the war in Ukraine drove up food and energy prices. Even in wealthy countries, ordinary people suddenly felt poorer. Groceries cost more, rent cost more, heating cost more. So yes, inflation is about rising prices, but beneath the surface, it's about power, about redistribution, and about who sits on which side of the line when the value of money shifts. Let's talk about the winners, because yes, there are winners. First, borrowers. If you owe money, a student loan, a mortgage, or even government debt, inflation quietly works in your favor. Imagine you borrowed $100,000 to buy a house. Over time, your salary rises with inflation, but your loan payment stays fixed. That means you're effectively paying back less. Governments know this too. After World War II, the United States and the United Kingdom were drowning in debt. But instead of collapsing, they let inflation slowly erode those debts relative to the size of their growing economies. Second, asset owners. If you own property, farmland, gold, or even artwork, inflation can make you richer. Landlords can raise rents, farmers can charge more for crops, investors in oil and gas suddenly see profits surge. During the inflation spike of 2021 and 2022, while ordinary households struggled with heating bills, oil companies reported record-breaking earnings. The pain of consumers was mirrored by the gain of producers. And then there are countries that export scarce resources. If your nation sells oil, natural gas, or wheat, inflation often strengthens your hand. Russia, during the Ukraine war, profited from higher energy prices, even as Europe and much of the developing world scrambled to pay their bills. Gulf states saw windfalls when oil hit $100 a barrel. For exporters, inflation can look less like a crisis and more like an opportunity. Inflation is not an equalizer. It tilts the field, rewarding debtors and owners and punishing savers and workers. Now let's turn to the losers. Wage earners almost always lose. If your paycheck doesn't rise as fast as the prices around you, your real income falls. That's what economists mean by real wages. And in most inflationary episodes, real wages lag behind. You may feel like you're earning the same, but your money simply doesn't go as far. Savers also lose. Inflation is like a hidden tax on savings. That $10,000 account you've been carefully building, it loses value every year that prices climb. Unless you invest in assets that keep pace with inflation, your savings quietly melt away. Retirees on fixed incomes are hit especially hard. If your pension doesn't adjust for inflation, you can find yourself unable to afford basic necessities. What felt like a comfortable retirement one year can turn into financial insecurity the next. And entire nations can collapse under the weight of imported inflation. Countries that rely heavily on importing food and fuel are the most vulnerable. Take Sri Lanka in 2022. Already deep in debt, the country was crushed when global prices for fuel and food spiked. Gas stations ran dry. Protests filled the streets. Eventually the president fled the country. Inflation didn't just break the economy, it broke the political system itself. This is the brutal truth. Inflation is not evenly shared, it's regressive, it hurts the vulnerable the most. And that's why inflation is never just economic, it's political. Think about Britain in 1979. Years of rising prices and public frustration swept Margaret Thatcher into power. Or the United States in 1980. Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter by promising to stop inflation, framing it as a moral failure of government. In Argentina today, where inflation runs in the triple digits, the political system has been reshaped entirely by public anger. Populists, strongmen, and radical movements thrive when people feel their money evaporating. Inflation is not just an economic headache, it's an electoral earthquake. People don't blame supply chain disruptions or oil shocks. They blame leaders, they vote governments out of power, they take to the streets, sometimes they even overthrow regimes. So, who steps in to stop the spiral? Central banks. Institutions like the Federal Reserve in the United States, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England exist in large part to keep inflation under control. They usually aim for around 2% inflation, and their main tool is interest rates. Raise rates and borrowing becomes more expensive. Mortgages, car loans, credit cards, all cost more. As borrowing slows, spending slows, and inflation cools. But there's a dark side. Higher rates also slow the entire economy. Businesses cut back, investments stall, jobs disappear. In the early 1980s, Federal Reserve Chair Paul Volcker famously cranked interest rates sky high to crush inflation. It worked. Inflation fell. But unemployment surged, factories closed, farmers protested in the streets, Volcker was burned in effigy. This is the harsh reality. Fighting inflation often means choosing between prices and jobs, and no politician wants to make that choice. Now let's step into the present. Why did inflation return with such force after 2020? Part of the story is COVID stimulus. Governments around the world printed trillions of dollars to keep economies alive during lockdowns. People had more money in their pockets, but supply chains couldn't keep up. Too much money chasing too few goods is the textbook recipe for inflation. But supply chain chaos made things worse. Shipping containers piled up in ports, factories in Asia shut down, semiconductors were in short supply, driving up the price of cars, electronics, and everything in between. And then came the war in Ukraine. Suddenly, wheat exports collapsed. Energy prices soared. Families in Europe faced winter heating bills triple the normal size. Across Africa and Asia, food inflation sparked protests and unrest. But inflation didn't look the same everywhere. The United States and Europe saw inflation around 8 to 10%. Painful but manageable. Turkey's inflation hit 80%. Argentina's soared above 200%. Nigeria's food inflation climbed over 30%. Inflation exposed global inequalities. Energy exporters like Saudi Arabia and the US benefited. Import-dependent nations suffered. Inflation reshaped global power, not just household budgets. So where are we heading? Economists debate three possible futures. One is persistent inflation. If globalization keeps fracturing, with trade wars, supply chain nationalism, and climate disruptions, inflation could remain high for years. Another is a return to low inflation. If technology, artificial intelligence, and automation drive huge productivity gains, prices could stabilize or even fall. And then there's the nightmare scenario, stagflation, weak growth combined with stubbornly high prices, a replay of the 1970s, only this time on a global scale. Which future we get depends on politics as much as economics. Will governments manage debt responsibly? Will they coordinate internationally, or will geopolitics keep fueling crises? Here's the bottom line. Inflation isn't just about the rising price of groceries or gasoline, it's about power. It's about who gains and who loses when money shifts in value. Borrowers win, savers lose, asset owners profit, workers fall behind, governments maneuver, families tighten belts, nations rise or fall depending on their place in the global economy. Inflation is a redistribution machine. It is invisible, relentless, and deeply political. And that's why, when prices rise, the question isn't just why is this happening, it's who's cashing in, and who's paying the price. You've been watching a Nexus-Feed deep dive session. If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to like and share the video. Subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analysis of topics shaping global directions in politics, business, and technology. Subscribing also helps us grow as a new YouTube channel. Thank you. And let us know your thoughts on the topic in the comments section too. Until our next one, stay curious, stay critical, and keep safe.